Hello there. Happy Wednesday. I am so excited because we just started book 3 of the Boxcar Children, The Yellow House Mystery, on Monday. I just read one chapter, but I just wanted to jump in and get started. But if you remember, last summer they were at an island, the island that their grandfather owns, and they found all of these old artifacts. And they found out that Joe, that they thought was just a handyman, was really their cousin, and he works at this museum. So they ended up bringing this whole team there to kind of like dig up, I'm guessing like, oh my God, I can't, archaeologists, right? To like dig up the artifacts and everything, and they were gonna blow the top off the cave. And little Benny wanted to be there when they blew the top off the cave, but they said it wasn't safe. But in chapter 1 of book 3, they got to go to the island when they were going to blow the cave, and Benny even got to push the handle down for the explosion, which, how cool would that be for a little boy? I think they said he's 7 years old. That would be so awesome. I mean, I kind of want to do that. But if you remember, a new character entered in chapter 1, and her name was Alice. And they found out that Joe and Alice went to school together, and Benny thinks they're going to get married. That was chapter 1, okay? I didn't want to tell you this on Monday. Spoiler alert, chapter 2 is called a wedding. No way this is happening so fast, but let's get started and let's see, all right? What a day it was for the Alden children when the rocks were all taken away. The floor of the cave was smooth sand, just right for digging. More men came to the island that day, and the digging began. "Isn't it funny to see grown-up men digging in the sand?" said Benny. "Watch them, Benny," said Alice. "You will see them put things in that big box." Sure enough, the men often found broken pieces of dish or a smooth stone and carefully put them in a box. The children never grew tired of watching them. Every day after school, they went over to the island to see what the men had found. Henry could not come until late on some days, for he had to row with the high school crew on the river. He had been captain of the high school crew for a year, but as soon as he came, he always helped Joe carry the boxes to the boat. One day, the box was so heavy that Henry could not get it in the boat. "I'm sorry, Joe," he said. "Let's stop here at the yellow house and sit down for a minute. This is harder work than rowing." Joe was glad, too, to sit down on the wooden steps of the little yellow house. Soon, Benny was looking in all the windows. "Let's go into this house sometime," he said. "I wonder why we never did, Joe," said Jessie. "Do you know why Grandfather doesn't like to talk about it?" "No," said Joe. "I never asked him because he seems so sad about it. I think it has a mystery. Someday, Alice and I are going to go into the house and solve the mystery." "Without us?" cried Benny. "Yes, sir, without anybody," said Joe. "You don't really mean you'd go without us?" Benny asked. He could hardly believe his ears. "Don't tease him, Joe," said Alice suddenly. She put her hand gently on Joe's arm. "Let's tell him. Let's tell them all." Maybe you don't need to tell us. Maybe we can guess," cried Benny. "All right, go ahead and guess," laughed Joe. He took Alice's hand and held it. "You make it too easy," said Benny. He looked at Henry. "Didn't I tell you? I told you a long time ago." "It wasn't true a long time ago," said Joe. "Let's guess," said Violet, taking Alice's other hand. "Does the secret have anything to do with music?" "Yes," said Joe and Benny together. "Will everybody wear beautiful clothes?" asked Jessie, smiling. "Yes," answered Joe and Benny. "Will there be a cake and maybe a beautiful ring?" asked Henry. "Right here," said Joe. He held up Alice's hand. On it was a beautiful new ring. "Funny we didn't see that," said Jessie. "Not so funny, dear," said Alice. "It went on just this minute." "For good," said Joe. "Where are you going to live, Alice?" Violet asked suddenly. "Well, you know Joe has the whole top floor of that big house all to himself," Alice said. "He says he needs company, so we will live there together." "Oh boy, right in the same house with us, just the same as ever," Benny shouted. "Does Grandfather know?" asked Henry. "Well, yes," said Joe. "We told him yesterday. He told us we could have the top floor. After all, it is his house." "Will the wedding be in our house too?" asked Jessie. "Yes, we want Violet to play the wedding music on her violin, and we want Watch to wear a big white ribbon and come to the wedding too." "He won't like the ribbon," said Benny, "but he won't bark if Jessie tells him not to." "When is the wedding?" "As soon as you get out of school," answered Joe. "Then you children won't be busy. And Alice and I will have done a lot of work in the cave." "I can't wait till school is out," said Benny. "I guess you'll have to," laughed Joe. What a wedding the Alden wedding was. Everyone talked about it afterward for days. Alice was very lovely in her beautiful white dress. Violet played for the wedding on her violin with 3 other players. She wore a long violet dress, and Jessie wore blue. The illustrations kind of cracked me up, you guys. Look. See this beautiful picture of the wedding? The violin. Watch wore his big white ribbon, and he did not bark until it was all over. When everyone was out on the porch saying goodbye to Joe and Alice, he barked and barked. By then, it didn't matter, for everyone was laughing and talking. The children did not know what to do with themselves right after Joe and Alice had gone. They tried to read. When it was almost time for supper, Jessie said, "I wonder where they are going for their wedding trip." "I assume that's a honeymoon." "I don't know myself," said her grandfather. "Please don't tell where they are going." "They will be back in 2 weeks," said Violet. "Let's go upstairs and look at their lovely home." Even Mr. Walden went up with the children. Watch came along too. He was always happy when he was with his 4 children. Mr. Alden sat down in a big easy chair while Violet and Jessie looked again at the pretty blue and white kitchen. They went into the sunny bedroom and back to the pleasant living room. The new dishes were set in piles in the clean cupboards. "It will be so much fun for them to keep house here," cried Jessie. "Everything is in such good order. Alice will love it." "Won't we have a wonderful time this summer?" said Benny. "When Joe comes back, he is sure to have some fine ideas." "Maybe they won't want us around, though," said Jessie. "We must be very careful about that." "Well then," said Benny, "we can think up the ideas and ask them to do things with us." "A very good plan, my boy," said Mr. Alden with a smile. "If they don't want to, they can always say no." Then they heard a step on the stairs. It was Mrs. McGregor, the housekeeper. She was a kind little lady and took fine care of the children. Her hair was white and her eyes were blue. "Supper is ready," she said with a smile. "I hope I can have some more wedding cake," said Benny. "I just love weddings, don't you, Mrs. McGregor?" He took her hand. "Yes, my dear," said Mrs. McGregor, smiling at the little boy. "Your cousin Joe has a fine wife, and he is a fine young man himself. It was a lovely wedding." Then Violet thought, as she often had thought before, that there was something sad about Mrs. McGregor. "Yes," she said to herself, "she's even sad when she smiles." That is the end of chapter 2. Wow, that was quick. They went from the end of chapter 1 with Benny being like, "I think Joe's going to marry Alice," to them saying they're going to get married. And now they're married and on their honeymoon somewhere. So let's jump into chapter 3, okay? Chapter 3 is called The Mystery. And hi, Mom. Thanks for hopping on. The children were lonesome after the wedding. They longed so much for Joe and Alice. But just then, the mystery of the little yellow house began. Supper was over. Warm air was blowing through the open windows, and birds were singing their evening songs. As Mr. Alden sat down in his easy chair, he said with a pleasant smile, "Isn't it time to think about summer plans?" Henry looked at his grandfather. "Grandfather," he said, "do you mind if I ask you something?" "No, of course not," said Mr. Alden. "Ask anything you would like." "You may not think this is polite," asked Henry slowly. "But what is a grandfather for?" asked Mr. Alden, winking at Benny. "I know you are very polite to me always. Go ahead and don't be afraid." "Well," said Henry, "do you remember last fall I asked you why we never went into the little yellow house on Surprise Island? You looked very cross for a moment, and Jessie and I were sure we had hurt your feelings." Jessie went on, "Don't you remember? You said, 'That's another story.'" "Oh, I remember all right," said Mr. Alden. "I could never forget that." He looked from one face to another. "If you 4 children will come over here and sit down on the floor, I'll tell you all about it. I guess the time has come when you ought to know." Whoop. Mr. Alden waited until they were ready to listen, and then he began. "You know I had told you my father built the barn on Surprise Island for his best racehorses, and the man who took care of the horses built the little yellow house for himself. The man's name was Bill. He was about 30 years old, and so was I. I loved Bill very much. He took fine care of the racehorses, and he lived in the little yellow house with his good wife." "Racehorses," cried Benny. "Did they race?" "Yes, they raced while my father was living. My father was your great-grandfather, you know. Bill loved the horses, and he was a good, kind man. But I must tell you, he was weak." "Not very strong, you mean?" asked Benny. "No, Benny," said Mr. Alden sadly. "I don't mean that at all. He was a very strong man. He could lift the boat. I mean, he had a weak will. Anybody could tell him what to do. Mr. Alden stopped. "Don't tell us if you don't want to," begged Jessie. "Yes, I want to tell you now. I'm afraid Bill was a coward. He would do anything his brother Sam told him to. His brother had some bad friends." The children were suddenly very quiet. They knew that this was a sad story for their grandfather to tell. "Let me go and get Watch, please," cried Benny. "I'll be right back." Everyone had to smile as Benny disappeared into the kitchen. They knew that Benny always wanted the dog when things did not go just right. He came back at once with Watch running after him. "Lie down, old fellow," said Henry. Watch lay down beside Benny and put his head on his paws. "Well, one evening," Mr. Alden went on, "Bill's wife, Margaret, noticed that Bill seemed to have something on his mind. He would not talk about it. After she had gone to bed, she heard a strange grating noise on the front room where Bill was. She got up and went to see what he was doing. There he sat, reading the paper. The noise had stopped. He asked her what she wanted, and she told him about the strange noise. He said it must have been the waves on the rocks. But it wasn't waves, and Margaret knew it. She began to get very worried. She went back to bed and pretended to sleep, and the noise began again. "Didn't she ever find out what it was?" asked Benny. "No, Benny, she never did. To this day, nobody knows what Bill was doing in that front room." This went on for 2 nights. The next night, Margaret smelled something strange. She thought it might be paint. But when she came out, Bill was not painting. He was reading. Then one night, he went out to the barn to see the horses, and he never came back. "Never came back?" asked Violet. "No, Margaret waited for an hour. Then she took a light and went out to look for him. He had given the horses water, but he had left the barn door open. The rowboat was gone. Then Margaret telephoned to me. I got up and dressed and found a policeman. Captain Daniel took us over to the island in another boat. But of course, it was dark and we couldn't find a thing." "No clues?" said Benny. "That's right, no clues," said Mr. Alden. Next day, the island was full of policemen. They looked under the barn, under the dock, all through the woods, but they could not find Bill. They found Bill's rowboat a few days later. It was tied up at another dock about a mile away on the mainland. "Did they radio the news?" asked Benny. "And get the FBI men?" "Oh, think, Benny," said Henry. "There weren't any radios then." "Oh, I forgot that," said Benny. "But at least they found him, didn't they?" "No, they never found Bill," said Mr. Alden. Margaret thought the clues were the strange smell and the grating noise in the front room. So the police went all over the little yellow house. They thought they might find a letter. Margaret thought she had seen Bill reading one. "You mean maybe a letter frightened Bill?" said Henry. "Yes, that's right, but they never found one. They took up the rugs. They hunted all through the desk. They even went down the chimney with the light." "Did they take up the floorboards?" asked Henry. "No, they didn't take them up, but they looked at every board in the house. There was dust between every 2 boards." "Why didn't they put a notice in the newspapers?" asked Violet. "They did. We had a notice in the newspaper every day for 2 years, but nothing ever came of it." "I'm so sorry for Margaret," said Violet. "She must be old now." "Yes, my dear," said Grandfather with a smile. "She seems old to you, I know." "Seems old?" said Violet. "Do I know her?" "Yes, you all know her very well. She is Mrs. McGregor." "Mrs. McGregor!" shouted all the children. They could not believe it, for Mrs. McGregor had taken care of them and listened to their troubles ever since they had come to live with their grandfather. They could not think of her as young or as anyone in a mystery. At last, Henry said, "I suppose she couldn't live alone on the island, and so great-grandfather gave her a home here?" "That's right. He asked her to come here to live with us as our housekeeper, and the next year he died. She has lived here ever since. We never talk about Bill now, and nobody has ever been inside the little yellow house ever since then." "It's such a lovely house," cried Jessie. "It's too bad that it's such a sad place and nobody can live there." Henry sat up and put his hand on his grandfather's knee. "Grandfather," he said, "couldn't we go into the little yellow house? I do wish you'd let us. Just let us look around. We might find something." Mr. Alden looked at Henry and smiled. "You're a good boy, Henry, but do you really think you'd find anything when the police couldn't?" "No, I suppose not," said Henry. But just the same, all the children kept looking at their grandfather. Suddenly he leaned forward. "Do you really want to go?" he asked. "Oh, yes," they all answered. "Well, all right. You may go. You may hunt around all you like and see what you can find." Then Benny said, "I don't want to go." "You don't want to go?" shouted Henry. "Why not?" "Well, I think it would be good Or I think it would be mean to go without Joe and Alice, said Benny. They won't come home from their wedding trip for 2 weeks. Is that all? Cried Jessie. You scared me, Benny. I thought you really didn't want to go. We'd all like to wait, said Violet. It will be much more fun if Joe and Alice can go with us. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we found something, some clue? Cried Henry. Yes, it would, said Mr. Alden, but I don't think you will. Don't talk about this to Mrs. McGregor yet, will you? We won't, promised Henry. Look, Benny, you won't tell, will you? I never tell secrets, do I? Asked Benny. I never told where Joe and Alice went on their wedding trip, did I? Do you know? Asked Henry in great surprise. Of course I do. You do, said Mr. Alden. I don't know myself. Nobody told me. They told me I could tell you 2 days after the wedding. That's right now. Well, where did they go? Cried Jessie. They went to our barn on Surprise Island, said Benny. That was another surprise because they are so near and everyone thinks they are far away. Just think of that. Our very own barn where we stayed last summer, cried Jessie. That's right, said Benny. He was delighted to surprise even his grandfather. Well, said Henry, now I can hardly wait for them to come home. I won't be able to sleep a wink tonight, said Jessie. I shall be thinking of Joe and Alice and the little yellow house. They all expected to stay awake all night, but soon they were all sleeping quietly, even Watch. The end. Wow. Okay, so a lot of pieces are falling into place. So Mrs. McGregor's husband, Bill, went missing, and she heard a strange smell and a weird noise. I have no idea. I do not remember what happened, but do you guys? I have a feeling, I'm just guessing, that maybe they're going to find Bill, and he's going to be alive somewhere. What do you think? How crazy would that be? And I can't believe Benny kept that secret because he's 7. And I know I'm not very good at keeping secrets. My sister and I always tell each other what we get each other for Christmas. We have our whole lives, but are you good at keeping secrets? All right. I hope you all have a fantastic evening, and we will jump into the next chapter probably tomorrow or Friday. Bye, you guys.